Hello and welcome to our daily sketching routine. It's Tuesday, May the 6th, 2025, and today's topic is going to be a continuation of a deep dive that I started yesterday, which I called Art Basics Deep Dive. So today we'll be focusing on imagination, and it'll be like tips and tricks is what I'll call it. But before we begin, welcome back if you're returning, and welcome if you're new to the channel. I sketch and post every day, and I use timers to stay focused and to build a habit. So yeah, this week is going to be a deep dive into yesterday's video, which it was the introduction, so I'll post a link to it. There's a lot more details in that one, and it explains what all of this is and also how I got here. And so I'll post a before picture if you want to know more details and the process and stuff like that. But today I'm going to focus on this topic of imagination, which also includes ideas, inspiration. I put down invisible. I'll also put down intuition. So I'll just jot down notes as we go along. I'm just going to focus on this for the most part, although all of them are connected. Sometimes it's good to kind of focus. But yeah, let's get started. So I'm using a medium point. Seems to be like kind of the easiest. So yeah, I'll put up the before. I have a lot of videos that kind of talk about like the steps and everything, but in this one, as far as like imagination, so I just want to go over, because it's called tips and tricks, so I want to go over just some tips and tricks. So one thing is that imagination, the reason I put invisible is I'm not looking at anything. I'm basically, like, I have an idea. So I had an idea to maybe add to the background, which all of this kind of looks like a collage. So there's no reference. I think one thing is that it does take practice. It takes imagination. And yeah, like with practice, like it starts to, it'll become easier is what it's the thing. However, there's different approaches even within like drawing from imagination. So for example, part of it does come from study. So like studying clouds. So you might want to look at some clouds and sketch it, kind of like the way I'm doing here, although I'm not looking at this. So it does involve vision or visualization. I don't know, like let's say you've never seen clouds, or you're not able to see, then yeah, like I'm not sure how you would draw clouds if you can't see them. So it is like visual. So that's one thing. But then the other thing is like an idea. So in yesterday's video, like this just kind of spontaneously happened, but then I added details. So for it to look like this came from study, but it's also like a style, like the pen and ink, which I talked about. But now that I'm here, then the imagination and the ideas, they sort of happen in a certain way. So maybe I want like this moon right here. So I'm just going to draw like a circle, and I'm going to like sketch it in. So that's one way to draw from imagination, is to sketch something in. And same with like these branches. Part of it is studying branches, kind of how they work. So there's a kind of formula to the branches, just because like they get bigger and then like smaller as they branch outwards. So there's that. And then the thing about like shading, so let's say I'll just put in this kind of shading, kind of a silhouette. So that's like a study kind of thing. But then it's also kind of an imagination kind of thing, because like you see this and then you can kind of picture it in your mind. So you can just draw it, in other words. Like you don't have to look up a picture of a tree or anything. And in fact, you could just do this and it would be all right. But then the idea of style comes in, since I'm doing like pen and ink. So of course it's going to look like black and white. And for me to get like the values, I have to, for example, for this particular pen, I have to shade it like a certain way. Part of that's like the look. So this is kind of a good example of what I mean about right here, making it look more like foreshortened right here. So that comes from study, just kind of knowing. But you know how like at nighttime, like a lot of this is sort of one shape. So you could have done this thing right here, where you just do like the negative space. So I could have just drawn like the negative space, but in this case I'm drawing the positive space, which is to say the branches themselves. But then you could just make it like a silhouette, because you have branches that are like coming towards you, so you're going to get all those like little shapes, which you could have drawn that. Kind of like this. And then just kind of imply like these in-between shapes right here. So yeah, this isn't from reference or anything, it's just sort of made up. However, it was from studying, so that you kind of know how, like why it looks the way it looks. But like you could have just copied the shapes. Like I guess that could be like the other thing I talk about. So when you're drawing from imagination, so this is like my experience with it. One thing is, yeah, like shapes. So these are shapes, like triangle, sharp looking, and then you have like more rounded shapes. Like clouds are probably going to look more rounded. You have sort of linear shapes, so like the line itself is like a shape. And you can use that. Like if I used vertical lines, so let's just say I did that, it's going to have a different look because it's a shape. Like these are like shapes. Part of it is you just experiment. So like with like the face of the character, like my thing is I like to make them into characters. But then there's a lot of experimentation. You're gonna mess up. So that's why I always say like kind of do it gradually, kind of like this. Like kind of build it up. Sometimes if you're working on stuff like this, like it took me about an hour from yesterday's video. That seems to be kind of how much time it takes. However, I have sketches in the sketchbook that I've had to paint over. Maybe even like in something like this, I added like a lot of these shadows just to kind of adjust things, because that's kind of the thing when you're cross hatching like the face, it changes the like the value. But I mean, it's okay because sometimes you get an interesting look or an interesting character. But it's just like an experiment, and you kind of have to be willing to mess up. That's kind of like the thing with drawing from imagination. It's really fun, but yeah, like you can mess up. So you have to be kind of open-minded about things, and activate that part of your mind that remembers stuff. So memory does have a lot to do with it, but not necessarily in the way that you might think. So for example, let me just kind of draw something a little different. So I'm going to draw like a cat. Now, I had a cat, and I mean, I kind of know. So I'm just going to like sort of go off of memory just to kind of begin with. Like, let me zoom in. So this is like just kind of from memory, and like it's a shape. I'm going to go off of just some of the sketches that I already have. So let's say that I turn this into like the cat right here. So it kind of has like this sort of shape to it. And this is kind of a style thing. I'm sort of memorized, but then it's also like simple shapes. But then to add detail, you might want to, it's kind of what I did here. You might want to look at some like faces and stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. And that's like, it's part of the fun of it. Like this, it's stimulating. It stimulates the imagination. But then here, I just drew like kind of what I remember. I wouldn't be able to draw this. I mean, the more you draw something, like the more, I guess, convincing. The other thing that has to do with like imagination is also like abstraction. So like this is kind of abstract, just like with this back here. You have to be, that's why I like abstract art. I don't really do it per se, although I think there's levels like that's kind of abstract. I just tend to turn it into something, make it like represent something, because that's just kind of what I like. Although I do like abstract art. So yeah, there was no reference used for like for most of this. So in the next one, I'll talk about like study, and I've done videos where basically like you can copy something and that's like a study, whether it's from life or from a photo. But a lot of these things, they overlap. So in a way, like I'm studying, but like it's in my mind. And sometimes, so the cat was kind of an example of what I mean, where I just kind of drew it. Let me draw something kind of, well, kind of like with this picture. So I'm going to extend like this. I don't really know, like I don't have a reference or anything, but I'm just going to draw it from like imagination. And it can be kind of anything that seems like sort of interesting. So if I draw like, I'm just going to draw a hand, and it may be hers. I'll see. But let's say that I just kind of imagine something. And I'm just going to draw like what I imagine. And you can take your time. So you can take your time and just draw stuff like this. So part of this is coming from the idea. Like I had an idea to do this. And then once you kind of have something going, you can just kind of make something up. Like it may be her hand. Kind of like this. So there wasn't really any construction, you just sort of draw a hand. So you could draw another one. So I picked a hand because there's a lot of shapes. So I'm just gonna, so then if you, let's say you want to do something a little bit more complex, then that's kind of like what the study is. So part of it is like the shapes. So if you study something, and we'll do that like when in the next one, where I have videos in the figure drawing playlist where like you study the hand, like draw from life and stuff. And then what happens is you'll start to remember shapes. Kind of like this. But like the more complex it is, the more you might have to adjust. So in a way, this is like the gesture of the hand. Now, this may be part of the character. It looks like it could be, just from the proportion of it. So on these complex kind of like hand positions, sometimes it's kind of the same with like the branches. Sometimes it's like the in-between shapes, like the negative space, that gives it the look. And then you can just adjust it. So for example, start to adjust. This is a sketch, so it can always be drawn a little bit better. Like once you, and that's kind of what I mean with like imagination. It's, you have to be kind of open to experimenting and making mistakes, and but you can come up, it's pretty fun, and you can come up with some interesting things. And of course, when you're visualizing something and drawing it, it's not really like a verbal thing, it's more like a visual thing. So a lot of times you're not really saying anything, you're kind of visualizing it and drawing it and then seeing. So as I wrapped up this video, tomorrow, so that's just some tips and tricks. Hopefully it was helpful. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions. I'll go over these topics again. But tomorrow I want to talk about like the study aspect of it. A lot of that has to do with, for example, let's say you want some like details of stuff, and you can go back and like look up details. Or the other thing would be like using reference, but then changing it to where you can understand it later for like the memory aspect of it, so that when you're drawing it, like you can make up stuff. But that'll be it for today. I want to thank you for joining me for our daily sketching routine, and if you enjoy these videos, please support the channel. I appreciate it, and until next time, keep on sketching.